Lesson 8, samples. So samples and calls go hand in hand. We went over calls in our previous lesson. So what are samples? A pharmaceutical sales associate will make a sales call to a healthcare provider. The calls are made to promote specific products that their company sells. So we discussed that previously. We have calls, then we have details. When a sales associate makes a presentation to the HCP, they detail one or more products that they are promoting. We discussed this also, what's in their bag, what are their products, what are the brands that they currently carry in their bag that they are promoting to HCPs. A sales associate will often leave samples of the product with their HCP. The HCP will then distribute these samples to their patients when the patients come in for an office visit. Many of us have been in a doctor's office before. We have some issue with ourselves and we're going to get a prescription, and many times the doctor will give us samples that have been dropped off by a sales associate that we can take until our prescription is filled, or samples in place of the prescription for a short period of time. Samples are usually distributed only for mass market products like diabetes, cholesterol products, antihypertension products, and we'll get into a little more why that is, but it mostly is because of cost and the way that the product can be taken by an individual. HCP definition. So a healthcare provider definition can vary from company to company, but samples can only be dropped to a person who is licensed in that specific state to write a prescription for a controlled substance. They cannot be given to a registered nurse who doesn't have the ability to write a prescription, or an office manager, or anyone else. In sales data, however, sometimes the healthcare provider definition is broken out to writers and non-writers. So even though you may call everybody an HCP, some of the HCPs are not legally allowed to write prescriptions. Chain of custody. Most pharma products are controlled substances. That's why you need a prescription from a medical doctor to get them. A prescription from a licensed HCP is required to obtain and consume these products. And there is a chain of custody between the manufacturer, distributor, wholesaler, group purchasing organization, pharmacy, etc., and patient. So you have to track all of the products that are given to sales associates and then given to doctors, as well as track anytime anyone receives a prescription. So products are tracked from facilities, and they're tracked by manufacturing facilities, dates, lot numbers, product recall for tainted vaccines, and also criminal activity for opioids. Now, I know that this is saying they have to be tracked and there is a chain of custody, but anybody who watches the news understands that there are a lot of illegal prescription drugs out there, prescription medications. They do come in the country illegally, but they can also be either stolen or forgotten about in a manufacturing facility, and then they could be distributed from there. There's also a chain of custody between pharma companies, sales associates, and HCPs. So when an associate is given product samples, they have to sign for them so that they can be tracked and that they become accountable. The samples are accounted for by the sales associate. Samples cannot be sold. Tracking is not always easy, but has gotten better over the years. When an associate hands samples to their HCP after they detail the product, the HCP must sign for them, stating that they have received the samples. Most now paper receipts are a thing of the past. Most sales associates have a CRM system, a customer relationship management system, on their iPads or on their tablets. And when they go in and they make a presentation with a detail to the physician, to the HCP then signs electronically right on the CRM. It's kind of like if you ever received a package from UPS and they ask you to sign something electronically, it's the same thing. It's a tablet or some kind of hardware device. Sales associates are not allowed to deliver samples to individuals who do not have legal authority to accept them. So, individuals who can accept samples, these are people known as writers, HCP writers, medical doctors, physician assistants. Individuals who cannot accept samples, these are non-writers, psychologists and other PhDs. They are doctors, but they're doctors of philosophy and not medical doctors, and office administrators. Those are just some examples. A sales associate must detail the HCP before giving them samples. So the sales associate has to give the HCP, the healthcare provider, a sales pitch. Sample drops are no longer allowed. A sample drop, as we discussed in the calls lesson, is when a sales associate would go into the office, drop off samples at the front desk with a receptionist, or drop off samples with an HCP without actually talking to them. That is not allowed. Just a little illustration of the chain of custody. So the pharmaceutical company or the distributor of their products hands over samples to the sales associate. The associate has to sign for those samples. The sales associate then goes and visits a healthcare provider, healthcare providers, and at that point, after they have a presentation with a detail, then the HCP will sign for the samples. So you have a chain of custody. Sampleability of healthcare providers varies. So not all HCPs are allowed to be sampled. Again, we talked about writers versus non-writers. Just because a sales associate's customer relationship management system has somebody listed in there as an office administrator, as an HCP, that person is not legally allowed to write prescriptions and therefore cannot be sampled. The other thing to keep aware is that sometimes healthcare providers are under sanction. So if a healthcare provider has done something inappropriate, or the healthcare provider is not actually licensed to practice medicine in another state, they cannot be sampled. So it's incumbent upon the sales associate to make sure that the HCP is sampleable. It's also more incumbent upon the IT department and the business teams to make sure that the information being passed on to the sales associate is correct and that the doctors can be sampled. A sanction is where a state or federal government restricts the HCP from writing prescriptions or from legally obtaining samples from associates. We just went over that a little bit. Federal sanctions are usually enacted because the HCP has done something illegal or unethical. State sanctions are less severe. So sometimes if an HCP forgets to pay their license fees for that state, they can be put on the sanction list and not be sampled. But a lot of times, mostly what you look for are federal sanctions versus state sanctions. As I said, it is incumbent upon the sales associate and the pharma company to know the sampleability of each HCP. Is the individual a licensed writer, and or is there a sanction against the licensed writer? Sample logistics. As mentioned earlier, not all products can be sampled. Some products are just too expensive to be given away, and other products have a delivery method that is not conducive to being sampled. For example, if your product is an ingestible, you can swallow it, pills, tablets, capsules, that's most common. You could sample that product as long as it's cost effective. Injectables may not be practical because the person may not be able to inject themselves with the product. They have to go to an infusion site and get an injection there. So that may not be practical. Inhalers may cost too much. Skin absorption products may cost too much. So it all depends upon the cost-benefit analysis. One other thing about samples is you want to make sure, and this is incumbent on the pharma company, you want to make sure that you aren't over-sampling your HCPs, giving away too much of your product for free. What happens is you do a cost-benefit analysis, and you can see exactly how many samples were given to Dr. Young, how many prescriptions were written by Dr. Young. And you can see that if you're giving away too many samples and it's not effective, the ratio of what's going on, then you end up wasting money that way. So you have to make sure you're being cost effective when sampling your HCPs. Prescription drugs versus OTC drugs, which is over the counter. Pharmaceutical products are controlled substances, most of them are. Over-the-counter products are allowed to be purchased without a prescription from an HCP. Sales associates do not usually call on HCPs to promote OTC products because OTC products are purchased directly by the patient. The exception may be when a product is moving from the RX category to the OTC category. Many popular medications such as Tylenol, Motrin, Advil, Aleve, Flonase, they at one time were all prescription medications, and they moved from the prescription category to the over-the-counter category because over time, enough patients took them, enough data came in to show that they really didn't have long-lasting harmful effects if taken properly, and therefore the FDA said, you know what, it's okay to trust the patients with getting these directly instead of having a prescription for them. Thank you. This is the end of Lesson 8. There will now be a 10-question quiz.